Hello, everyone, and welcome to Wandering Whispers Storytelling ASMR. And today's story is a special story written by a new friend of mine. I suggest everyone go and check out her channel, ASMR Duck. I will have a link in the description box. She has a great channel with a lot of great stories on it. I suggest everyone go check that out. The story she was kind enough to send me to read today is called The Oak's Hidden Promise. To say William's younger life was a fortunate one would be most wanting indeed. He was born to a harlot in a country village in the south of England. He spent most of his younger days listening to his mother plying her trade. At age 10, when he was old enough to start working in the fields, his mother sent him off to live with a farmer and his wife. William had never been of a strong constitution, and the work was very hard. It took its toll on the young lad, and when he became ill and was unable to work, the farmer had no need of him, so he sent him on his way. William knew his mother would not be pleased to see him if he returned upon her doorstep, so he asked about the marketplace if anyone was looking for a worker. Sadly, he was not the only young lad looking for a job, and given his sickly complexion, no one was willing to hire him. If it had not been for a kindly old widow who took pity on the lad, he would have surely died. Unfortunately, not long after taking William in, the old woman passed away. With no known family of her own, William inherited the cottage and was able to stay, and at least he had a permanent roof over his head. Attached to the cottage was a small shed, and in it William found all manner of tools. He taught himself how to carve, and soon he was able to sell the wares he'd made at the local marketplace. This newfound talent became an income which supplied William with enough money to keep his belly full and maintain the cottage too. Years passed by, and the lad grew into a strapping, fine young man. However, he kept very much to himself and did not entertain anyone, nor did he show any interest in the young women of the village, who almost fell over themselves whilst trifling for the affections of the handsome young fellow. William only had one focus in his life, and that was to become the most renowned woodcarver in all of England. He could go to the bed at night and dream of creating the most magnificent sculptures. He could see himself standing in the center of London, with the noblemen and ladies applauding his wonderful wooden creations, which were put on display for everyone to admire. There was an old leather-bound book which took pride of place on the wooden shelf next to William's bed. He had never learnt to read nor write, but the pictures within the book intrigued him, especially the one of a large wooden horse, which was so enormous that men were pictured climbing into it, and on another page was a man riding upon the back of a beautiful winged horse. Of course, as most of you would have guessed, the book was on Greek mythology, and the pictures were that of the wooden horse of Troy and Pegasus. However, William knew nothing of myths and legends. Nothing ever seemed to happen in his small part of the world, which could be classed with such mystery or intrigue. But all that was soon to be changed one fine summer's morning. William had decided that he would take his axe and walk through the woodland near his cottage. He was searching for just the right-sized oak tree to chop down for a special piece of artwork he had wished to create. However, when he found a particularly fine oak and cast the first blow of the axe into the tree trunk, the axe swung back violently, as if the tree were made of rubber. The young man shook his head in surprise, and he tried once more to lay a blow into the hard wooden trunk. Yet again the axe bounced back with not one mark being made upon the tree trunk. William ran his fingers across the edge of the blade to check the axe was not blunt. Drops of blood appeared on his fingertips from the cuts the sharp edge of the blade had created. He could not understand why he was having such a problem with this particular oak tree. He had cut down plenty within the woodland in the past without such a trial. For the third time, William stood firmly in the spot, and with his legs positioned in a manner so that his upper body could let a swift blow to a tree. However, it was not the trunk of the tree that caused him to fail his task on the third attempt. This time, he felt something entangle about his ankles as he lost balance and fell to the ground. William looked down to see what had taken him by his feet, and much to his surprise, the roots of oak tree had emerged from the earth and were firmly entwined about his ankles. Then he heard a deep, woeful sound, which came from the center of the tree's trunk. "It is very woeful of young Saxon to think I would not stop you from trying to destroy me." William sat with his mouth ajar, not knowing what to say. He could not get up nor run away because the tree had him pinned firmly to the spot. "Do you think it right, as a human, to kill another living thing? Then again, I have seen your ancestors butcher, ravage, and pillage freely in the past, so I assume no better of you now," the tree said in a vexed manner. This time, as it spoke, William could make out what looked very much like a pair of lips moving within the bark, and angry eyes scowled down at him crossly. Alright, I'm gonna try an English accent. No, I'm not, I can't do it. If I'd known you were not an ordinary tree, but one that was bewitched, I would not have attempted to disturb you, the young man finally answered, once he had got over the initial shock of being spoken to by the oak. Upon him saying this, there was a hollow sound coming deep within the tree, and its branches quivered back and forth, even though there was not a breath of wind. Upon listening carefully, William then realized the tree was laughing at him. "Ordinary tree, ordinary tree," the oak repeated. "None of us are ordinary. We may all grow differently, just as you humans do. We all think differently, just as you humans do. Some of us are strong and stand up for ourselves, and others are weak and fall under the woodman's axe. There are trees that are too scared to stand up for their right to live and grow old. That is all there is to the matter. I shan't have you end my days when I am still in the prime of my life. So if I set you free, will you find it within your heart to leave the trees in peace and chop us down no more? William felt unsure how he should answer the oak tree's request. He had to make a living, and carving wood was the only skill he knew. How could he just stop doing something that gave him pleasure and a sense of achievement, let alone a plate full of food for his supper each night? I am a wood carver. What would you have me do if I am unable to ply my trade with a supply of wood, oak tree? You are wise for your young years, human. I see. You would have me answer your own question for you. Well then, if your carving is your only skill, I shall help you acquire another, one that no other human can obtain without my help, and one which can also give you great power. William looked up into the oak's dark eyes questioningly. He wondered what trickery the tree was playing on him. How could a mere tree bestow such a gift? But he thought, since the tree seemed to have magical powers, maybe it was able to achieve such a feat. What skill is it that you would grant me? William couldn't help asking. If I answer that question, I have your word that you will not chop down another tree for as long as you shall live. William hesitated for a second before replying, You have my word. He then felt the roots which had bound tightly about his ankles fall loose and retreat back under the soil about his feet. Climb up onto my branches, young man, and make your way to the top of my canopy. Tucked between the top two branches, you will find a small crystal vial and the tail feather of a pheasant. Place the bottle carefully into the top pocket of your jacket, and the feather into the band of your hat. When you return to the ground, I will tell you of the magical powers these objects hold. William did as the tree had asked of him, and sure enough, tucked tightly into a gap between the branches, was a vial filled with a dark green liquid and a striped black and brown feather. He carefully made his way back down the tree and alighted in front of the trunk. Splendid, the oak said with a smile upon his thick bark face. There is a story about the two magical items you now hold in your possession. But first, I must warn you never to break the vow you have made to me. For if you should cut down any tree from this day forth, you will die a most violent death. William looked a little worried upon hearing the oak make this proclamation. However, he was an honest man, and had no reason to trick the oak into thinking he would dishonor the promise he just made. I give you my word, oak tree, and you will have to trust me that I will keep it. Very well, my good fellow, the tree answered softly with a sigh. The story of your magical gift goes back to when I was much younger in years, and only half the stately height that I am today. There was a young druid who came to sit under the shade of my canopy on a hot summer's day. He had been traveling for hours to escape those who were plotting to kill him. You see, He had the powers that frightened the noblemen, and they decided that his death would be the only way they could take charge of the growing throngs of peasant folk who would assemble around the druid in the town square of each place he visited. There was also another reason they sought him, which seemed to have slipped my mind. But never mind, I don't think it was important. The oak tree stopped speaking for a moment to shake free an annoying crow who had landed on one of his branches and was squawking loudly. "Begone with you, crow. Can't you see I'm having a serious conversation with the Saxon peasant?" The crow flew off with a loud flapping of wings, and the tree carried on telling his tale. "The druid intrigued me, and the only way I knew that was troubling him was when I asked. Like you, at first he was surprised that I had spoken to him. He had told me that the vial and feather he carried were items he had obtained from an old warlock who was close to death. The old man sort a young druid to do only good with the items which he could no longer protect. He did not wish them to get into the hands of those who could use them for evil. Hence he cast a spell over them so that whomever held the magical gifts would have to keep a promise to the person who owned them before. If the promise was ever broken, the owner of the gifts would become a tortured soul and perish a painful death. I promised the druid I would hold them in safekeeping until his return, or until I found someone worthy of their possession. Now I need to tell you of their powers. From the vial you hold, one drop of the elixir upon one's lips will heal even those close to death. However, it will only work if that person has not lived a full life, and the feather in your hat will give you the power to fly, so that you may soar through the sky like birds." William looked at the tree in total disbelief. "What trickery is this?" he said in a vexed voice. "If you do not believe me, run your finger along the length of the feather's quill, starting from the base and ending at the tip," the tree replied with a smile. William did as the tree had told him, and in that instant his legs were no longer touching the ground as he started to rise quickly into the air. "How do I get down?" he asked in a panic, waving his legs frantically. "Run your fingers along the quill from the top to the bottom," the tree answered with a chuckle. William did as he bid, and gently returned to the ground. "Now you know how to fly and how to heal. Go out and explore the world, Saxon, and do well by other human folk instead of chopping down trees." "Before I leave, I still have some questions to ask of you, Oak," William stated. "Why did the druid give you these magical items, and how come you chose me to take possession of them above all others who have passed beneath you before this day?" "I see you do not trust me," the tree said with a sigh. "Very well. If you must know, the druid knew that if he was caught by the nobleman, the precious items he held would be placed into the wrong hands. He asked that I hide them for him until he could return to collect them once he was able. Sadly, soon after he had hidden them safely in my canopy, the men who sought him arrived here. He was unable to fly to freedom, and right where you're standing now, a knight's sword soon put an end to his life. In answer to your second question, I saw in you a determination to achieve your goals. You wanted to cut me down, even if it meant drawing your own blood upon the axe to check it was sharp enough to master the job. Then after failing twice to administer a blow upon my trunk, you stood to your position firmly, so that the swing of your arm could give conviction to the force behind the axe. You might see these actions as mere trifles, but I see them in a different light. Now be off with you. I have spoken quite enough, and my bark lips are starting to splinter from being rubbed together more than they should in one day." William doffed his hat to the tree and headed off walking in the direction of a cottage. However, he had not gone more than 100 steps before the urge to try out the magic feather gripped him in earnest. No sooner had his fingertips reached the end of the quill than he felt his body rise into the air. He hovered for a moment, wondering how to move forward. It didn't take him long to discover that when he placed his arm out in front of him, that was the direction his body would follow. Traveling in this fashion, it only took him moments to return to his cottage. Once there, William wasted no time in packing a knapsack with a few of his prized possessions. He looked solemnly at the leather-bound book with his hand poised at its spine. Now he could fly just as well as the winged horse had done. However, he changed his mind about taking the book on his journey and left it sitting on the dusty shelf. What was the point of him taking it now, when he could no longer obtain the wood to carve a great statue? He did, however, gather a fresh loaf of bread, a wedge of cheese, and a small flagon of ale. Then, with one last look around the room, he stepped back outside and closed the door of the cottage firmly behind him. One touch of the feather upon his hat, and he flew off once more. William decided to head north towards London. He had heard some of the villagers talking about the plague that had taken hold of the city. He wanted to see if the small vial he had in his possession did indeed cure the sick. To stay undetected from the villagers below, William flew in the cover of the clouds. It didn't take him long to achieve both control over altitude and speed, and he was soon nearing the outskirts of London. He swooped downwards near a group of trees so that he could find a safe place to land unnoticed. Sadly, William didn't see the young lady riding upon her horse under the canopy below him. The same couldn't be said for Herstead, because the sudden sight of a man flying above his head spooked the animal. He reared up, tossing his rider to the ground, before galloping off down the road. As William hurried towards her on the grass, she looked to be very well dressed, as if she was the daughter of a nobleman. There was a gash upon the side of her head, where she had struck the ground with force, and she did not reply to him when he spoke to her. William took the small crystal vial from his coat pocket and looked intently at the green elixir within it. He still had his doubts as to whether there was any truth to that potion held the power to heal, but he thought that now would be as good a time as to try using it, especially as no one was able to witness his actions. He took the stopper from the top of the bottle and gently tilted over the mouth of the young lady. One single drop of green liquid fell from the rim and landed upon her soft red lips. No sooner had this happened than she opened her eyes and looked up at him. Then, in that same instant, the wound upon her head sealed, as if it had never been there in the first place. She hastily got to her feet, quite taken aback with the sight of the young peasant man leaning over her. "Who are you, and why are you upon me? I have no money for you to steal," she said hastily, as she stepped backwards away from him. "Please, my lady, do not be alarmed. You fell from your horse, and I have come to your assistance," William replied calmly. She looked around, and sure enough, there was no sign of her mount. "I do not understand what could have caused Caspian to rear up as he did. He was a gentle nature normally." "I saw a hare darting away from the trees before I found you," William lied. He did not want to tell the lady the reason her horse spooked, nor did he think she would believe him if he had divulged his magical secret. Well, thank you for your concern, peasant, but you can see I'm quite well and have no further need of you, the young lady stated in a forthright manner. She turned around and started to walk off quickly down the road. However, she didn't get very far before suddenly becoming dizzy, and she knelt forward upon the ground, holding her head in her hands. William hasted towards her, wondering whether the potion only had a short life, although upon seeing her, it appeared that by all accounts she had only been weakened a little by her bad experience. My lady, would you allow me to escort you home? I assure you there is no malice in my offer, nor do I speak the payment of my service. The young woman eyed him warily, however. In her current state of well-being, she had no other option left open to her, so she begrudgingly agreed. William took her up into his arm and carried her in the direction she told him that she lived. The stately home and grounds of the young lady were grander than anything William could imagine. He carefully placed her upon her feet at the entrance doors to the manor, and he turned to leave. However, no sooner had he done this than the floors threw open, and the girl's father was standing there looking at them both. "Young man, stand where you are," the Earl demanded in a loud voice. Once William did as he asked him, the Earl turned to face his daughter. "Christiana, I became most alarmed when Caspian returned to the stables without you. I have the servants out looking for you. Then I spy from the window this peasant carrying you here. What has occurred for this to be so?" The Earl's daughter quickly explained what had happened while her father gazed over at William intently. So I owe you a service for returning my daughter safely home, peasant," the Earl commented once everything had been explained to him. "No, my lord," William replied. "I said upon assisting your daughter that I seek no payment, and as I'm a man of honor, that shall remain my pledge. Then at least stay and dine with us this evening as our guest, for I am a man of honor also, and I will not see you leave the grounds of my house without showing you gratitude for returning my daughter safely home." William could not believe what he was hearing. Never would he have considered a nobleman to invite him to dine at his table. He bowed in reply and followed the Earl and his daughter into the house. Such a grand place was their dwelling. The young woodcarver relished in seeing such a fine woodwork that adorned the wall panels of the hallway and parlor. Lavish fabrics were upon the furnishings, and the richly colored drapes. Such extravagance was indeed a far cry from the widow's cottage. At 6 o'clock the evening meal arrived at the dinner table, served in highly polished silver dishes. William had never seen so much fine food before, nor had he such a variety to choose from. Once the meal was over, he thanked his hosts warmly and bid them farewell, and he was out of sight of the manor grounds. William took to the skies once more and headed for the clouds of smoke coming from the vast array of chimney pots in the city of London. No sooner had he landed quietly in a back alley when a young peasant came upon his first victim of the plague. A man was carrying the limp body of a young child from a doorway. He was dressed in a long, dark oilcloth robe, and was wearing a strange bird-like mask with metal-rimmed glasses, which he spied William from with a cold expression. "Stand aside, my good fellow, lest ye wish to join this lass in the afterlife," the man stated in a muffled, deep voice from beneath the mask. "Is that the plague that took her, sir?" William couldn't help asking. "Ye are not from around these parts, are ye? It is indeed the plague that took this child. I assume ye have not come across the likes of a plague doctor before. Now begone from here before ye become my next patient. But you see, sir, that is why I am here. I want to assist you with the victims of the plague, William insisted, standing his ground in front of the other man. Ye are either very foolish or very brave, young man. But if ye mean what you say, then I am more than willing to take on an apprentice. Follow me at a distance while I dispose of this body, then accompany me to my house, and I'll have ye fitted in the appropriate garment. I might add, though, it will only offer ye limited protection. Ye do understand the risk you're taking such work. What is ye name, young fellow? William couldn't believe his luck. Now he would have a mask to hide his identity while he healed the sick. Good fortune seemed to smile upon him with his new magical gifts. It is William, sir. I thank you for allowing me this opportunity to assist you. The other man shook his head from side to side, but he seemed grateful that there was someone foolish enough to help him in such a thankless task. No sooner had William joined the plague doctor when there was a surprising number of their patients who seemed to unexpectedly recover from their illness. The only deaths were from those that were old and at the end of their days. Quickly the news spread of the plague doctor and his assistant, who seemed to be able to cure most souls, even those close to death. As the news traveled, the pair were requested by everyone who had a family member to fall ill. The plague was not discriminate of classic, and much to William's surprise, they soon ended up at the very doorstep of the Earl who had entertained him with supper. It appeared that his daughter had developed the symptoms of the plague. The Earl was more than willing to depart with a payment of gold to have the plague doctor everyone had been talking about treat his beloved daughter. Christiana could not tell it was William behind the mask, as he stood watching on while the doctor examined her. I will go downstairs and inform the Earl that his daughter does indeed have the plague, and have him make the appropriate measures to isolate her from the rest of the family and servants. You start to cool her fever. Whilst I am away, the doctor informed William. As soon as he had left the room, William quickly took the vial from his pocket. I need to place a drop of medicine upon your lips, my lady, he said quietly to Christiana. She looked up at his masked face, weakly, as the liquid dripped from the rim of the crystal vial. However, William was not prepared for what was to happen next. No sooner had the drop of liquid touched her lips when she began to cry out in agony. First her lips, then her face appeared to be on fire. Suddenly, in a flash, her whole body was consumed in flames, till there was nothing but ash left upon the bedsheets. William looked on in horror. He could not understand what had gone so terribly wrong. Then he had suddenly realized maybe the potion could only work once on the same person. He had to make his escape before anyone returned to the room. William hurried to the window and threw up the sash. As he climbed through it, he could hear people entering the bedroom behind him. He quickly ran his finger along the quill of the pheasant feather and flew off as fast as he could. While he soared through the sky, William became very angry. He could not believe the oak tree had not told him of what would happen should he administer the elixir twice to the same person. He felt most aggrieved at the loss of the Earl's daughter, and if he could revenge her death, he most certainly would do so. The young Saxon landed not far from the magical oak tree. There, in a nearby field, he took a large bundle of freshly dried hay. William walked up to the oak and placed the hay down next to the tree trunk. I think I may rest here for a time, he said to himself, taking a seat upon the soft hay. He had not sat there long when the tree began to speak to him. I am surprised to see you so soon, young Saxon. Have you tired of your gifts already? The oak asked with interest. Oh, is that you, Oak Tree? William replied, pretending that he was surprised to be sitting under the very tree that had given him the magical items. Do I look that much like all the other oak trees that you do not recognize me? The oak asked with a low chuckle. I was tired and thought I might lay here for a time under the shelter of your canopy. But as you are the tree that bestowed the gifts upon me, I'd like you to cast back in your mind about the information the druid relayed to you about the potion. Do you happen to tell you what may happen should it be given to the same person twice? William stood up from his position so that he was now facing the tree. Why, now that you mention it, he did say something with regards to that happening to him earlier the day he came upon me. In fact, if my memory serves me right, there was a reason he was being pursued. He'd given the potion to a nobleman's son on 2 separate occasions. However, the druid told me the second dose had a deadly effect, and the boy had departed the world in a fiery blaze. And you did not think to tell me this important information when you had me take charge of the potion? William asked indignantly. I told you when you took possession of your gifts there was something that had slipped my mind. You cannot expect me to remember every fine detail of my meeting with the druid, as it had happened many years ago. I get so forgetful at times that I'm sure part of my trunk is full of sawdust. William slowly pulled the vial from his pocket. I have decided that I wish returned the potion to you, tree, for it has done well yet again. You can't leave the vial here, young fellow. I do not want the responsibility of finding another person to take it. You have to find someone worthy of its possession yourself. I do think so, Oak Tree. It is to be destroyed along with you. William replied hastily. The tree laughed deep within his trunk. You seem to forget the promise you made me, young Saxon. If you try to chop me down, you will die a painful death. That is, of course, if I don't struggle you with my roots first. Quick as a flash, William placed his finger along the quill of the feather, and as he rose into the air, he pulled the stopper from the vial and threw it into the pile of hay. A large fire soon took hold of the dry grass and the tree. As the oak started to burn, the young man shouted at him, You are a fool, tree, because you only said that I was not to chop down another tree for as long as I shall live. But you said nothing about burning a tree. Because of your trickery, you shall die as the young earl's daughter has done. I do not believe that you merely forgot to tell me such vital information. William stood back as the tree glowed fiery red before vanishing into a pile of ash. Then, as he made to leave, William spied something shining brightly in the place the tree had stood. He flew down and carefully picked out between the ashes. It was a crystal heart. As he looked closely at it, he could see faces staring back at him. Most of them he didn't recognize, but one face. One face he did. It was the face of Christiana, smiling up at him. And then, suddenly, all the faces vanished. Did he dare believe he had broken an evil spell? As much as he feared to do so, William flew as fast as he could back to the Earl's manor. And as he looked through the bedroom window, he spied Christiana sleeping peacefully in her bed, with not a sign of sickness. She seemed blissfully unaware as to what had happened to her. William turned and flew away, smiling happily. As he left the manor behind him, He thought to himself, it was time to take a wife who could bear many sons. Yes, sons, with good strong arms for felling trees. The end. That was my first time actually reading it through. That was a lovely story, Joy. Again, everyone, check out her channel, ASMR Duck. Good night. Remember,